Patience. And there we go. Perfect. Okay, welcome to the April WUG. Here we are, April 8th. I can't believe it. The year is just going. So Warewulf is an open source stateless provisioning system for managing HPC clusters at scale. It enables administrators to boot and manage compute nodes over the network without local disks, should you choose, making it quick and simple to deploy everything from small research clusters to massive top 500 systems. Originally pioneering the concept of the stateless node management over 2 decades ago, Warewulf version 4 has now evolved to integrate modern container technologies, allowing you to provision containerized operating systems directly to bare metal. It's vendor agnostic, highly scalable, and designed to make managing hundreds or thousands of nodes as straightforward as managing just a few, which is why it's become an industry standard backed by OpenHPC and used across universities, research institutions, and enterprises worldwide. Yay, I love that. Okay, so today, my little intro. Hello, I'm Rose Stein, community manager for Warewulf. If you got any questions, let me know. I was just letting some of the few folks that came early, let them know that I'm putting together a mailing list so that it is easier to stay in contact and you guys can reach out quickly. And then, of course, forward that on to other people. It seems that just the Google Calendar invite is insufficient and doesn't really, update consistently the way that I would want it to. Someone just the other day said, yeah, you invited me to the first one, but it didn't reoccur. So anyway, mailing list is on the way. Then we're going to have a few minutes. Jonathon Anderson, Technical Steering Committee lead here at the Warewulf Project, is going to do some project and community updates. And then our special guest is Arsalan, and he works at CIQ with Jonathon and I. He's going to get the conversation started with lessons from being a Warewulf support engineer here at CIQ. He's been with CIQ for 3.5 years. So he's got a ton of experience on do's and don'ts and best practices and all that good stuff. And I know a lot of you have some of that experience as well. So the conversation, open discussion at the end, bring your questions, put stuff in the chat with each other, make sure that you get all your questions answered. Okay. So I do want to just give a little shout out real quick to those that are helping maintain. I mean, obviously it takes a large village, but we'll just kind of give a shout out here to our Warewulf Technical Steering Committee: Gregory Kurtzer, Jonathon Anderson, Christian Gall, Timothy Middlecoop, and Jeremy Seidel. If you want to be a part of this, we meet the first and third Wednesdays of every month via Zoom. You can reach out to any of us or just put a little note in the Warewulf Slack if you'd like to join that meeting. For usually about 45 minutes, and all are welcome. Just a little update on our social media presence. We are growing. Our Slack is up, our YouTube is up, our Blue Sky is up, our X is up. We are out there doing good things in the HPC world. Okay, that is enough out of me. Mr. Jonathon Anderson, would you like to take it over and do some community updates for us?
Oh, will do, Rose. One moment.
Cool.
That's not the right button. So yeah, I'm mostly just going to talk about the impending, hopefully ever increasingly close Warewulf 4.7.0 release that we've been working on for a little while now. So we've changed from 4.6.5, I think is what we said we were targeting, to 4.7.0 for a couple reasons. One, that's just a bad version number for this kind of a release, and we've changed our policies to at least be, I say we've changed our policies to at least change that middle number whenever we're adding new features, whenever we're not just bug fixing. I went back to update our documentation to make that the policy and discovered that that was the policy already, and we just weren't doing it. So we're now going to adhere to our versioning policy and be more willing to update that middle version number for most milestone releases, and then only have a point release, like a third digit release, like a 4.7.1, for things that are truly just bug fixing or security updates, that kind of thing. But the main original impetus for going from 4.6.5 to 4.7.0 was that we have changed the Golang version that we are basing Werewolf on. And this is mostly to bring us back onto a supported version of Golang, which is mostly important because upstream packages that we depend on stop supporting unsupported version of Golang. And so we were behind on bug fix and security fixes for our upstream packages. So Werewolf 4.7.0 has a massive update to all of our dependencies to bring them in line with a couple of security scanners that CIQ contributes, as well as the Dependabot system that GitHub just provides. So I think we've got like two Dependabot things that are still pending now that have come up since we did that big update. So we'll try and get those in for 4.7.0 as well. But we're massively in a better foundational position for the security and stability posture of Werewolf from the perspective of our upstream dependencies than we were before this release. So we're looking forward to that. We also have increasingly started using language models in at least the review and auditing of the Werewolf code base. And so one of the first big places where that will come up in 4.7.0 is we did a large documentation audit that I just started up Claude and said, go look at all those docs and audit it against the code and tell me where there are mistakes. And so between that and a bunch of grammar and spelling fixes, there's a pretty big documentation update that'll be included with 4.7.0 as well. We also, and this was almost an accident, but it's something we've wanted to do for a while. We have removed the last bits of the legacy gRPC API from Werewolf, which was something that was never really used externally. It was kind of a half-completed project to add an API to Werewolf, but the downside to it was the way it happened to have been implemented drove a lot of the command line through the complex code that implemented that API without actually getting the benefit of the command line being an abstracted API client. So it made some of the code and especially some of the command line more difficult to administer and maintain than it needed to be. So that has all been removed, and we expect that to be an improvement to contributor experience in the future. It should be easier to get up and running with developing and updating Werewolf for new contributors that don't have to take a path through gRPC code that doesn't make sense to them. We also have added, and this is especially thanks to our very gracious contributor Christian Goal, we've added TLS support to the Werewolf daemon. So now I think it's only you can only require it for the runtime overlay and for the REST API that is still present. You can make Werewolf only do that communication over TLS with the Werewolf server. But then you can do TLS with all of the other things as well, and we'll expect, or I expect anyway, that we'll move more and more communication to an encrypted channel between the compute node and the server over time. That we can't do all of it yet until we go all EFI and do everything as an EFI boot, which may or may not be soon. And then the part of that, because we were in there making kind of big changes to Werewolf D in order to support TLS, we did kind of a larger Werewolf D refactor that once again just makes the code a fair bit easier to maintain and develop on, largely for the benefit of new contributors who get in there and don't know why it's organized the way it is. But it'll also just make it easier to not make mistakes in that part of the code in the future. So I'm glad to have that be part of the 4.7.0 release as well. All of that is in. All of that is merged and ready to go. What you see here on the screen is the 4.7.0 milestone as it exists today with things that are not yet closed out. It may seem like a large number of things. Several of these are duplicates because there's both an issue and a pull request for them. So that cuts down on this list. And then several of them are frankly quite minor. They're additions to or additions to existing overlays or new overlays that we just haven't reviewed yet, and they'll get in without too much effort. The larger things that are blockers for the release that are pending, we're adding a new unset command for Werewolf control to explicitly remove the setting of parameters on a node or a profile. And this is largely in response to a number of reports that we've gotten both at CIQ and in the community that certain attributes can't be unset with the kind of magic unset or undef value. And this is because unset and undef are not a valid IP address, for example, so you can't specify them as the IP address you want to set so that the system will then handle it magically and unset it. That doesn't work because of the way we recently changed um, type uh, it checks the type of the input value to be a valid value at the command line level before it gets to the back end. And so it blocks it and says you can't do it. So this should fix that whole class of problem and just let you unset any arbitrary thing on a node or a profile that you want. And that'll be really simple. That is in, sorry, it's not merged. We have a complete implementation, but this and the pull request after it have shown us that perhaps we, or at least I, have gone a little bit too far with my trust of language models, and I'm very grateful to Christian once again and Timothy as well for reviewing these and saying, this looks like perhaps your language model got away from you, and we should clean that up a bit before we just merge that in. So I'm doing a final review of or um, cleanup of that, making it a little bit more human readable, and then we'll get those in without too much work. I think they're in reasonably good shape. They just need a little bit more cleanup. There's two more things in here, two more relatively large pull requests that are in here that may or may not make it into 4.7.0 for adding extended attribute support to Warewulf images, the OS images, and then for fixing a bug in certain cases where with certain large images that have lots of files. These are both under review. I think Tim is looking at both of them. But I don't necessarily consider them blockers for 4.7.0. I think this one we would still be willing to put in a 4.7.1 follow-up release if we needed to later. This one sounds like it might be okay, but we'll see if it's still pending by the time we get these other two in and decide if we want to continue delaying release or just release and bring them out later. So that's the current state of the release. I don't have a formal timeline. We wanted it to be before now, but we'll keep working on this, and you'll see the announcement as soon as we can get it into the Werewolf Slack in the general channel. You'll see that. But I'm happy to take any questions about what's going on with Werewolf release and what's in 4.7.0 and anything else. I see there's a chat message too, so I'll check on that. Oh, yep. Yeah, thanks, Josh.
Yeah, it is
Do
awesome.
you see that being an easy upgrade from 4.6 to 4.7?
Yeah, it should be even easier than previous ones. Um, and not because we've made any changes to upgrade. We do still have the Werewolf Control upgrade commands, and those should continue to work just exactly as they did for previous releases. But there's no real big changes to the interface. It's more just like the code is changing so much. We felt like it was good to twiddle the version number, but it should be a relatively straightforward update. We're not even doing anything complex user facing. Like in the transition from 4.5 to 4.6, one of the biggest things that changed was splitting the overlays between varlib werewolf and user lib werewolf, I think, are the two places that by default. Nothing like that is happening. All of the on disk stuff is pretty consistent.
Awesome. That was
And
exactly my question too.
I think the only new, sorry, Rose, I think the only thing that is changing in the configuration is just uh, those new parameters for enabling and disabling TLS. And so we have handling in the Werewolf Control upgrade to set those parameters based to what we think they should be on a new deployment or on an upgraded deployment. Sorry, but everything else is the same.
This might be kind of a random question. Is there any kind of like specific help that you might need from the community? I mean, I know that you guys do a great job, but is there, I mean, you talked about documentation and testing and all that kind of stuff. Like, is there somewhere that people could jump in and help, be supportive?
I think the easiest things, like you said, documentation is great. If you're in the docs and something doesn't make sense to you, that is a great place to just clone the repository and make a change and submit a PR, and we'll do our best to get that in. And that's a pretty straightforward process. And especially if you have a language model, that can help you write the restructured text markup that's in the documentation because it can be a little, it's not like Markdown. And sometimes it looks like Markdown, and doing Markdowny things sends you down the wrong path. But beyond that, the next easiest thing to do is to submit updates to existing overlays or submit new overlays. And I think that's a great place where we could see an increasingly large set of kind of turnkey overlays that would be useful for people. If you've developed something that's useful in your environment, let's try and get it in. And right now, I think it still makes the most sense to deploy those things in the primary Warewulf repository, but there is another repository in the Warewulf organization for Warewulf overlays in here somewhere, I think. Yeah, here that we don't really have a maintainer for. You can see there's nothing in here. So if that sounds interesting to you and you would like to be more involved with Werewolf Project, taking up maintenance of this thing and starting to help us curate third-party overlays into a kind of first or second-party location like this, that could be really good.
Wait, what does
I
that
had
mean?
another
Like,
idea.
so people could share their overlay templates or overlays, and then you can grab them and use them?
Yeah, what we've wanted to do or what we've talked about. So right now you install Werewolf and you get a set of overlays that just come with Werewolf and they're just there. But we want it to be possible for people to put overlays into this separate place and then they could be installed optionally. And I think it makes the most sense that we would have like a Yum repository that would have different RPMs with each overlay in its own RPM that you could install individually. That's what we do with out of tree overlays at CIQ, for example. But there are a number of ways that we could distribute them. But yeah, it's the idea being these are vetted overlays that other community members think are useful, but maybe they don't make sense to always have installed. Like the network overlays, it makes sense that those are always installed. You shouldn't have to like figure out which ones to install for it to work. But maybe for a specific piece of software that configures a specific piece of software, maybe that doesn't always get installed. You only install it if you need it, that kind of thing.
Would you give an example?
An example of an overlay that we distribute within CIQ that isn't merged upstream is a Slurm overlay that configures the Slurm batch compute system. And it configures slurmd and tells it how to talk to a given server with tags that point it to that. That's the thing lots of people do. And that might make sense to have in a community repository like this, but less sense to have in every single Werewolf deployment because maybe you use a different batch queuing system and where does it end?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. That's very helpful. Any other questions or comments? Cool. Okay. And as always, something comes up, put it in the chat, raise your hand later. Just unmute and start talking. We'll figure it out as we go. Thank you, Jonathon. Appreciate it. And everyone behind the scenes doing good work here.
Thanks for
Yeah. Okay. Arsalan, it is your turn. I am so excited to hear the things that you have seen and come across at your time here at CIQ, doing support for our Werewolf customers, and take it away.
Definitely. Thank you, Rose. And thank you everybody for being here. This was pretty fun to kind of go through. We've been doing a lot of Werewolf support, V3, V4, we've kind of seen it all. And so particularly the things we're going to go over here are really related to the 4 release, just because that's kind of the latest and greatest that's out there. So give me a second, I can share my screen here.
That's actually a really good point. If you're still on version 3, don't be afraid to ask a question too.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
So everything that we're going to talk about here comes from a real cluster, a real admin. None of this is hypothetical. These are actual stuff that we pulled in from our ticket queues. And the way we've done this is we went through and kind of categorized it by the most gotchas that we've seen come in. So as far as what we're going to be talking about today, kind of some of the hot topics here. If you don't remember anything else, just, let's the five main pain points that we've seen across the board. The first one being the 4.6 upgrade. It was not a routine upgrade from 4.5, and so if you didn't prepare for it properly, you had some gotchas there, and so we saw a lot of customers run into that. And we actually have a blog post that we eventually posted to kind of help users get through that. The other thing I think that is a big one is the larger the image, the more difficult it gets to get it to boot. And so while this has been addressed, this was something that we frequently saw coming in. And I won't go through all of these because we're going to get to them in depth. But yeah, the overlays I think is a big one. A lot of customers that raise tickets run into issues with setting up overlays or understanding, what's the best way to apply this. So it's always a mixed bag of goodies, but it's always fun to go through it and help customers. So each of these slides have their own context behind it. So I'll get right into it. Upgrading is more than just a DNF update, and I'm sure most of you know that here. So the overlay structure has changed, as Jonathon mentioned. Syncuser, that whole functionality had moved, and the implicit fallback was gone. So if your node was using custom profiles without a default profile attached, they would boot with no overlays. And the issue with that is that it's a silent failure. Everything could look fine until you try to reboot a node, and nothing comes back up. And so, we kind of have some fixes for each of the gotchas. That I'm sure most of you are familiar with these. This is best practices here. You always want to, run a backup of etc Warewulf and varlib Warewulf first. Make sure that's captured somewhere just in case you do run into this issue. And then, that way you're able to rebuild an image and test a reboot before you can kind of push this out to a fleet. We also going on to the 4 gigabyte, the boot wall. So if you're running GPUs or AI workloads with CUDA baked into the image, you've probably hit this before. Around 4 gigabytes, the single stage boot starts to fail. We've seen that. It's not a hard cap necessarily, but we've seen that happen more often than not. If you're on a BIOS, then it's a hard memory limit. If you're using UEFI, then it's usually doing with init-rd. But either way, what we've come to realize is that the 2-stage Dracut boot is kind of what resolves this. And so iPXE loads in the small init ramfs, and then that's kind of where it gets the full image from and gets the kernel to boot up. So if you have images that are anywhere near that size or larger than that, our suggested method here is to enable Dracut boot and keep them lean by putting CUDA on NFS or something of that nature. And I'm not closely tracking the comments here in chat, so feel free to stop me if we have any comments on this.
Yeah, I can help you with that as well. If there's something for you, I'll let you know.
Cool. Thank you, Rose.
Yeah.
Gotcha 3, overlays. So that overlays, like I mentioned, these are probably the number one ticket category that comes in. And there's kind of two things here that have been addressed really in the 4.6 release. So the first one was the overlay race condition. And so sometimes the WW client would be writing to live files, and something like Slurm would be trying to find a user, and you would get a user not found just because etc password was still being written on. So that actually was fixed in 4.6.4 with the atomic file replacement. And so that was a neat add-on to have into the system. Something else folks might run into is the as you scale, the overlay builds would get a bit slower. And the reason for that is it's doing redundant parsing and serial processing. And so you'd see that kind of slow down as your fleet would start to grow in size. But again, this was also fixed in 4.6.0. And so if you are on 4.5, I think these two upgrades alone are worth the effort to try to get up to scale with what we have on the latest and greatest code here. Moving on here, I think this was a fun one. ETH0 isn't ETH0 on every server, and I'm sure some of you might have run into this. It's a bit subtle, but you'll have a config that works perfectly on one server, and you deploy new hardware, and the NIC just gets the wrong IP, and the rename failure shows up in general CTL, but it's not somewhere typically that an admin looks at. And so the fix that we've seen that works for most people is, or I guess the issue that they run into is they're using a predictable naming interface. What we actually had a customer who was doing so, and when they upgraded the Rocky 9.6, the interface changed, and that essentially caused them to not be able to find it. And so what we suggest is to use something that's more of a custom name. And so I've given some examples here like WWNet, HPC Net Zero. This helps Warewulf to make sure that it's consistent across all your whole fleet in terms of getting these profiles and our interfaces assigned. Excuse me. syncuser. This was a fun one. We actually had a lot of customers raise tickets about this one. I think the funny part of this is it was documented in the changelog, and a lot of times as admins we just tend to overlook the changelog maybe sometimes. And so this one I think mostly every customer we had ran into this. And so in 4.5, user sync just worked because it was baked into the default generic overlays. However, in 4.6, it was split into separate overlays, and it was removed from the default. So you upgraded, everything seemed fine, and then someone tried to add a user on the head node, and it would never show up on the compute nodes. And so the critical point I wanted to call out here is that if you are running the runtime overlays, you want to make sure that you're when you set your profiles that you also capture the host and the SSH authorized keys. Otherwise, you're gonna have a fun time trying to get all your users set up again. This one is more of it wasn't just one particular issue. We've seen nodes not booting for a various amount of reasons, and so I thought the easiest way to capture this was to give a table here that kind of highlights some of the typical reasons we see nodes not booting. Two of the big callouts I have is the not found in node status right here. What that usually means is that Warewulf recognized the node by the MAC address, but the kernel or image file was missing from the disk. And so it's not really a DHCP issue. And so you typically just have to, rebuild the image again. And then the other one I thought that was worth calling out was getting stuck on the grub menu. And so this usually only applies if you're using the grub boot mode. But when in doubt, just drop into iPXE shell and you can run the ifstat command first, and that tells you if the problem is DHC, DHCP, firewall, or something a bit deeper than that. I can share this slide at the end of the meeting. So if you guys want to kind of go through some of these or just have it as a reference point, I'm more than happy to do that as well. This one is a bit interesting because you don't see the issue. It's invisible, for lack of a better term here. You'll have a lot of RAM on your system, no OS level errors, but for some reason, all the jobs are pinning to a certain core and you randomly get killed. We actually had a customer spend weeks trying to debug this. And what we found was that the default initramfs, rootfs dumps the entire OS image onto a single node before the kernel knows the NUMA topology even exists. And so what we found here was switching to tempfs is the better solution here. It uses the mpool, the interleave to go around and round robin on all the nodes, and this spreads it across all the NUMA nodes evenly. And so even if you're on 4.62 or later with Dracut boot, this will happen automatically. For everyone else, you should set that proactively. The root equals tempfs. So this was a pretty interesting gotcha that I thought. I'm not sure how many people run into this, but it did take some time to figure out what the actual root cause of this was. Secure true isn't as secure as you think. And the reason I say that is it protects the runtime overlays. And that's pretty much as far as it goes. So any host that can reach Werewolf D on port 9873 and has a MAC address can download the system overlays, and that's by design. And it was tracked as a feature request upstream. So the lesson to take away from here is to never put secrets into the system overlays. I would suggest also that if you have credentials, make sure that you're not pushing that up to Git when you push this out, because the last thing you need is credentials all over the internet. So just be mindful of that whenever you're backing up your directories, specifically node.conf. These are more of not major gotchas, but these are just, I guess, what we consider best practices and just minor things that we've seen across the various tickets that have come in. And so, you'll have the stale exec locks that just dropped your SSH. And so we have some fixes here listed as well. Let's not try to edit the YAML files. A lot of people have a bad habit to just go in and try to modify that. But the WuGCtl command that is there for a reason, and it never fails. And so we always suggest making changes using the command. Some specific ones here, the commas in the kernel args, these are two separate arguments here. And so this a lot of times can break the serial console output. And so we thought that was interesting as well. The big one is always never use a base image that doesn't have the kernel. So the Rocky base image doesn't include the kernel, which is why we ask you to go to the actual Werewolf specific base images. It helps prevent a lot of pain, I'll say. And of all of these, some of the big ones here is to make sure you're pinning your kernel before you do DNF updates. If you have some specific drivers there, we've noticed customers run into issues with things breaking if they don't do that. So I don't want to just talk about what's broken. I thought it was also worth talking about what sites do differently that work well. I think a lot of this is probably self-explanatory, but it's always good to kind of just get a reminder of what best practices are. And so the smoothest sites that we support, they tend to have a constant pattern, which is they all test upgrades on a single node first. As I'm sure you know, that can help a lot with kind of catching any issues before you roll a whole fleet out into production. Always back up before you're upgrading, and keeping the images lean. It helps with just managing the boot and making sure everything is coming up as expected. As I mentioned in the last slide, definitely use those wwctl commands instead of trying to edit the YAML files. It just makes it a lot easier for the whole process. And then the secrets, as I mentioned, just know where your secrets are. You don't want to push anything or back up anything and realize that you kind of put your credentials out there. None of this is magic or secret sauce. It's going back to the fundamentals. But the sites that do this consistently, we tend to rarely hear from, and I thought it was worth sharing. That is everything I have for here. I think the final one, and the team was really adamant about putting this in there, was read the release notes before you upgrade. I think it'll help save you from a world of pain. And reading the changelog is always key. So yeah, that's the presentation. I have myself and Stephen here from the support side. We're happy to talk through some of this if you have any comments, questions, or concerns.
I really appreciated Jonathon coming on camera and giving a big smile and not reading the release notes. You mean you write them for a reason, Jonathon?
Would have thought, right?
Yeah, that was great. Sorry.
No, awesome. And yes, so far the release notes are 100% human generated too. So a person wrote that with love. You should read it.
With love, a person, somebody out there. That's wonderful. I'm so glad that we recorded this, and I imagine that there'll be some requests to see those slides. So if you want to pop them in the Werewolf Slack, that'd be pretty awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Great. So, yeah, hear from you guys. I mean, you guys are all the ones who are out there running it or thinking about running it. Did you find this helpful? Were there some things that you're like, oh, yeah, we did that, or oh, shoot, we're doing that? Be curious.
I'll go. That was excellent. Thank you so much. Back to the predictable interface naming for InfiniBand. Do we have any ideas on how to take care of that as well? I guess you set the names by MAC address on Ethernet, and that works. Maybe you or others have experience with dealing with the InfiniBand side of things.
Yeah, so if I remember right, and sorry, the gentleman on our team who actually does a lot of the InfiniBand stuff is actually out on paternity leave. But if I remember right, with InfiniBand, it's the first half of the ID is always random. And so I believe it shows it right there. The udev.net name will actually filter out the first half and then it keys in on that second half. And that's what causes udev to actually change the name of the interface. So as long as you have that in the MAC address section of Warewulf, if I'm remembering correctly, that will correctly map the name to the appropriate interface with other than InfiniBand.
Did you say the second part?
I believe so, yes. Yes.
Okay, cool. By the way, thank you. I missed this in your slides earlier. I didn't see this. So, okay, thank
I
thank
can
you.
at least confirm there are definitely people doing it with InfiniBand and having consistent naming there, but yeah, it is a little bit different for sure. Yeah, I like Josh's suggestion that have you considered just having one of them?
That's always nice.
Yeah, when I was trying to get a node that had two InfiniBand interfaces and one OmniPath interface in Warewulf, it was a bit of a challenge to get them all named correctly. I resorted to calling the OPA one OPA 0 because the kernel never names things that. And then I think I just got lucky and the active IB interface was always IB 0.
I think one of the issues that we run into, we don't have a lot of IB equipment to be deploying this on. And so if the stuff that's in there, if we can't come to a solution in the community, like please be talking about the problem you're having and we'll try and solve it. But it's easier to do when someone has an actual problem with actual hardware that they're trying to solve.
Don't be shy. I know there's been other, I really like also, Arsalan, thank you so much for at the end saying, hey, here's all some issues, which is always very helpful, right? Because that's usually any time that you when there's a pain, a struggle, something isn't going right, like you you want an answer as soon as you can. So that was awesome. But then you ended with just some things that are going well and why they're probably going well. So that was a great presentation.
Yeah, yeah. It's always better to be proactive than reactive, right? The last thing you need is someone telling you, "We told you to do that, right?" Or you should have known that. But yeah, what I had there is what we see a lot of sites that are actively working and deploying these clusters. Some of the key things that they tend to do. So it's always good to kind of just call those out.
It's also relieving to see that I've already implemented almost all of those best practices.
That's a good sanity check. Yep.
Maybe I think with some of the other things that I hear about is like high availability. So there are some like suggestions that you give people, but my understanding, and again, I don't know much, but is that there's a few different ways to go about it. And so is there kind of like a what you have seen how people do that?
I'm glad you asked because we have Mr. Simpson here on the call, and he's actually been tackling this for the past couple of weeks, and I think even wrote some suggestions. So, Stephen, I don't want to speak for you. Feel free to take that one.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have anything concrete to my knowledge. It's something that I've been just sort of looking at as what's the best way to handle this. And I think the reality of it is Warewulf is designed in such a great way that if the Warewulf server goes down, all of your clusters are still up and running. So the failure scenarios are a lot more limited than what they typically are in sort of other high availability environments. But there are a lot of our customers who are asking for it, and so there's a couple different ways to handle it. I looked at opportunities with like Pacemaker and CoroSync and using Stoneth to make sure that one server, you figure out the split brain scenarios, or you add a third server, and all those just seemed really complicated. So the one solution that I've been sort of thinking through is just keeping it incredibly simple with that Keep Alive D. And as part of Keep Alive D, you can actually have like state change scripts. So whenever Keep Alive D switches from master to backup, it'll actually like fire off a script that'll disable DHCP, restart Warewulf, all of that stuff, and then vice versa whenever the IP address flips back. That's kind of where I've been landing at in terms of thinking through the easiest way to have an active standby node. The big question now is how do you sync files reliably? There's a couple different ways to do it. I'm hoping that we'll have a solution here pretty soon if anybody is really interested in it. But that's kind of the high level overview of where we're kind of coming at it from.
Here's a stupid question. If you had a primary Warewulf and a secondary one, all changes you make on the primary one, they absolutely know nothing about each other, but you always make sure that the secondary one is a mirror of the primary one. You don't deal with DHCP, you just leave it all running, right?
Yep.
What breaks in that?
I've asked myself that too, right? Because like having Warewulf D and like TFTP and all that stuff running on two servers is not a big deal. Realistically, even having two DHCPs running is not the worst thing in the world because they're both pointing to the VIP. If you're going to do Keep Alive D, if you're not going to do Keep Alive D, then you could have a situation where it's pointing to, two different servers, which to your point may not be the end of the world. But I think from just the way I've been thinking about it is what's the easiest way to do it and sort of like the cleanest way to do it. And having one active DHCP server on a subnet is kind of the standard unless you're designing for it, either with DHCP failover and DHCPD, or I know there's a couple other scenarios, but typically speaking, you only want to have one running. But to your point, I think it would probably be fine. But I don't think, from my perspective, I don't think that's something that we would ever recommend someone run. Go for it, Jonathan.
Yeah, so to your question, you're absolutely right. So there's Warewulf can configure the DHCP server in two ways out of the box. One is the default, where it sets it configures a dynamic pool, and then it uses that pool for node discovery, and then the nodes switch over to their static address during provisioning. The other is to configure the DHCP server statically. And so then whenever you add or remove a node, you have to update your DHCP configuration, but that means the DHCP configuration knows all of the leases that your nodes should have, and they get that address every time. If you're doing static DHCP you can run as many Werewolf servers as you want, all on the same network with the same subnet, whatever subnet, the same network. And it's just whichever server answers the DHCP request is the one that ends up handling provisioning. That's
Yeah.
totally fine. But there's a lot of ifs in that, right? That make it not a great documented solution. So we're working on having something that just works out of the box that doesn't require you to make sure your environment is configured just so, such that we could have it just on, and the only thing that changes is you deploy a second one, or a third or a fourth, rather than having to kind of align everything just so. But you're absolutely right. Werewolf is very simple in this respect that all it is a file server that just responds to requests and gives information out. And if they all have the same backing data, better yet, if they're all storing all of it on a shared file system, then they can all just do it. But there's just a bunch of ifs in that we want to kind of wrap up neatly and productize for you.
Can I ask who the we is here? Are we talking CI? Is this a CIQ offering potentially, or would this
Uh,
be in the general project?
I'd say that there are a couple of different Wii's depending on hat. CIQ has an internal like desire and project to build something in this space, but there are other simpler ways to do it that I think could land in the community side, without as much expectation placed on it. So there's appetite for it in either venue, I think. Where such commercial things exist today, I believe what I've seen is that, who is it? There's an integrator that we've spoken with a number of times. Redline. Redline does a fair bit of work with Werewolf, and they deploy a pacemaker and CoroSync setup, which you could totally do today. And we have talked a little bit about trying to get their uh, pacemaker and CoroSync configuration merged into Werewolf. And if we did that, that would happen in the community. But it just depends on what ends up getting built, that would determine where it ends up. Was that a hand up to speak, Alexei?
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I have a question regarding scalability of Werewolf D. Say, I need to boot several hundred compute nodes, maybe 1,000, and see my VNFS is about 3 GB, maybe 5 GB size. Then it would be totally a load of maybe like around terabyte on Werewolf D. Is there any kind of like clustering plan for Werewolf D to boot up large clusters concurrently?
So the first thing I'll say that is that scale that you're describing isn't something that I would be that concerned with, even with a single Werewolf server. The actual provisioning process in Werewolf is pretty lightweight. It really is just file serving. So it's mostly just a matter of whether you can fit your image into memory, which at that scale I would presume you can, and how fat your network pipe is. But if you did need to scale, that is the thing that CIQ is interested in developing
Mhm.
and having, an HA and failover experience that's not just that, but also is arbitrary scale out. Right now, I don't think there's any effort to do that purely within the community. Though you can, when people do it, they just deploy multiple Werewolf servers and do what we were describing with a primary and then secondaries that get their config from it. And you can totally do that. What you typically do in that situation then is have your cluster partitioned where certain nodes are getting their config from certain Werewolf servers.
Okay, essentially just set up DHCP to tell which nodes need to boot from which of the Werewolf servers, right?
Yeah, and if you set it up statically, it will only respond to nodes it knows about. So you can just run multiple of those on the same network and it's fine.
Okay, thank you, Jonathon.
I will say with the two-stage boot in Dracut, if you do choke your network pipe like I have done, it is a painful recovery effort because Dracut will just hang in this Dracut state. iPixie will just reboot the node, which is great because it'll just keep retrying, but Dracut does not. So definitely make sure you have a fat network pipe.
That is explicitly a bug that is being tracked against 4.7.0 that we expect to fix in that release as well. I didn't mention it because it should be such a tiny thing that if Dracut breaks, it should reboot by default, and that should be resolved in the next release.
Well, excellent.
Good to know, though. That's good to know.
Everyone comes out of the woodwork just like, ah. Here, I'll pull that up real quick so that Josh, maybe you can look at that and see if you think well, I'll show it anyway, but now I'm seeing that there's not a lot of detail in this case. That certainly is what I had in mind when I see this title go by. But I'm going to put here. Oh yeah, this is actually more specific than I thought it was. I'm going to go ahead and just create one here so that we track that because we should fix both of those at the same time.
Yeah, my solution was just do rolling reboots so I never have to worry about it.
Yeah.
I remember trying to play around with some flags to like force it to kill if it ever ran the die command, but something about Dracut just wasn't liking that, and it was 10 o'clock at night, and I gave up.
Yeah. Oh, it wants my own template is getting in the way. There we go. That'll work. And I'll actually follow through and see if there is a thing like this already. Oh. Oh, there was one. Here it is. Let's move this into 4.7.0. There it is. And I'll close this as a duplicate.
Cool. Thanks for bringing that up, Josh.
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm not the only one with that issue.
Yeah. You usually never are. So I am always encouraging people. It's like to at least ask. Cool. Okay, well, that was a great WUG, you guys. Again, thank you, Arsalan, for presenting, and Jonathon for also presenting all the stuff that's going on. And thank you, everyone, for being here and participating and asking good questions and using Warewulf. It's makes me so happy. Okay, well, we will see you in the Slack, and if not before then, and next month. Same time, same place. We don't have a presenter just yet. I do have a whole month to figure it out. But if you have a topic that you would like to present or an idea that you would like to hear about, and so I can find somebody, please send them my way. Thank you so much, you guys. Have a great, wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Happy April.